No one anticipated it. Davido, Nigeria's globally celebrated music star, landed quietly in Burkina Faso. There was no concert, no roaring crowd, only a sense of purpose behind his unexpected visit. He was welcomed not by fans, but by a head of state, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young and defiant president of Burkina Faso, who had become a symbol of Pan-African pride and sovereignty. The meeting wasn't on any global agenda, but it would soon echo across the entire continent. In a moment that caught even seasoned observers off guard, Davido handed over a gift $1 million directly to President Traoré. It wasn't for publicity. It wasn't for politics. It was for the people. That simple act of giving did not just mark a meeting between two influential Africans. It marked a shift in how power and culture could cooperate. The $1 million donation was aimed at supporting grassroots development community projects and a vision of African-led progress. President Traoré, known for his humble lifestyle and unrelenting stance against foreign exploitation, was visibly moved. He accepted the gift not as a transaction, but as a symbol of trust, proof that Africa's own sons were stepping up to rebuild the continent from within. Across Burkina Faso and quickly across West Africa, the news ignited waves of admiration. Social media lit up. This is what it means to give back. One post read, "When an artist sees beyond fame and a leader embraces brotherhood." More than a donation, Davido's gesture was an act of diplomacy, a soft power message. It underlined how cultural icons can uplift political movements. It showed that influence can be used not to extract, but to empower. It bridged nations not through treaties, but through values. What Davido and Traoré shared that day wasn't just a handshake between music and leadership. It was a blueprint for a new African narrative, one where celebrities don't just entertain, but engage. One where presidents don't just govern, but listen. In the silence after the cameras clicked, a louder truth emerged. Africa no longer waits for saviors. It becomes its own. Davido's $1 million will build roads, schools, or wells, but more importantly, it will build hope. And that hope, passed from artist to president, from president to people, might be the most powerful currency of all. In a world used to stage diplomacy and distant leaders, this moment stood out. It reminded the continent and the world that change can be quiet, generous, and rooted in love. What if I told you that a pop star just handed $1 million in cash to a military president in Africa? Not a rumor, not a PR stunt. It happened. Right there in Burkina Faso, Davido, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, face to face, no red carpet, just purpose, and a gift that's making the whole continent talk. This wasn't about fame, it was about faith. A moment that broke all the rules and built something bigger. If this story moves you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because what happens next is even more unbelievable. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global giants, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice, and if you've ever seen the fire burning in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, then this story is yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand alongside something greater. Together we are part of a quiet storm, a new awakening. The whispers are becoming a roar. It wasn't politics, it wasn't performance. When Davido arrived in Burkina Faso, no one expected him to meet Captain Ibrahim Traoré and hand him $1 million. Not in a suitcase, not with cameras flashing, just quietly, directly, sincerely. It was a gift meant for the people, not the press. Captain Traoré didn't take the money as a leader padding his image. He took it as a guardian of his people. His response wasn't boastful, it was humble. He saw the gift not as charity, but as solidarity. A symbol that Africans were ready to lift each other, not wait for outsiders to do it. Across the continent, the news spread like wildfire. From Lagos to Ouagadougou, social media erupted. This is African unity in real time, some wrote. Others called it the moment artists became builders of nations. What Davido did wasn't a performance. It was a spark, and it lit something powerful. This wasn't a political alliance. This was something deeper. Cultural diplomacy, soft power, real brotherhood. When a music icon stands beside a revolutionary president and both speak through action, not just words, the world watches differently. And maybe, just maybe, the world starts to listen differently too. $1 million can build things. But this gift builds belief in self-reliance, in cultural leadership, in African futures, written by Africans themselves. It's more than a check. It's a challenge. And from Davido's hands to Captain Traore's heart, it now belongs to the people. And maybe to all of us. And that's exactly where it began, an unannounced arrival, a handshake that wasn't scripted, and a moment no one saw coming. Davido, one of Africa's biggest music stars, had landed in Burkina Faso. But he wasn't there to perform. No lights, no stage, just intention. He walked into the presidential compound, not dressed for show, but for something far greater. And then it happened. He handed Captain Ibrahim Traore a check, $1 million. No fanfare, no speech, just silence and then stunned disbelief. Bodyguards froze. Aides looked on, unsure whether this was a dream or something historic unfolding before their eyes. Who gives $1 million in person with no strings attached? But Davido did. Because this wasn't charity, it was a message. A statement that power doesn't always wear a suit or speak through politics. Sometimes it wears, music carries purpose and shows up quietly. Captain Ibrahim Traore accepted the gift with the gravity it deserved. Not as a personal honor, but as a signal that something was shifting. A new kind of alliance. A moment that blurred the lines between culture and power. And once it happened, nothing felt the same again. But the story didn't stop with the gift. In fact, that's where the weight of it truly began. When Captain Ibrahim Traore took the check, he didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't turn it into a headline. Instead, he looked at Davido with something rare in politics, genuine respect. Not for the money, but for the meaning behind it. He didn't thank him on behalf of his government. He thanked him on behalf of the forgotten villages, the children learning under trees, and the mothers walking miles for water. Because Captain Ibrahim Traore knew exactly where that money would go. This was not about vanity. It was about vision. He didn't see himself as a man being honored. He saw himself as a bridge between power and people, between culture and government. What shocked many was how quietly he held the moment. No celebration, just resolve. Because he understood something the world often misses: real leadership isn't loud. As Davido stepped back, the captain stepped forward, not in glory, but in responsibility. That one gesture placed a heavier burden on his shoulders, and he welcomed it. This wasn't just a donation, it was a promise, and Captain Ibrahim Traore intended to keep it. Then the ripple began. The moment the story broke, it spread like wildfire across phones, radios, and word of mouth. What had started as a quiet meeting in Ouagadougou turned into a continental headline. People didn't just read it, they felt it. Because something about it rang true. A musician, a president, a silent exchange that spoke louder than any press conference. Across West Africa, the reaction was electric. From Lagos to Bamako, hashtags surged. Unity in action, Africa for Africans. Young people shared clips, old women prayed blessings. Street vendors repeated the story like a legend being born. What shook people wasn't just the money, it was the message. That Captain Ibrahim Traore, a man with no golden palace, had been honored not by a foreign power, but by one of Africa's own. It made people ask questions. It made them dream. Could this be the start of something bigger? It didn't feel like a gesture anymore. It felt like momentum. Davido lit a spark, and Captain Ibrahim Traore held it steady. And as the story echoed further, it began to do something powerful. It made people believe again, not in politics, not in fame, but in each other. And then something deeper started to take shape. This wasn't just generosity, it wasn't even just unity. It was a new form of diplomacy, one built not on treaties or titles, but trust. What Davido and Captain Ibrahim Traore shared wasn't transactional, it was transformational. They weren't in a press room, they weren't flanked by ministers. They were two African sons standing side by side, reshaping what power could look like. One from the world of rhythm and lyrics, one from the front lines of rebellion and reform. And for once, the cameras didn't steal the moment, the meaning did. What shocked many wasn't the handshake, it was the silence. No speeches, no slogans, just intent, just understanding. In a world flooded with performance politics, this was raw. It felt human. It felt like something you don't see in headlines, the merging of purpose and pride. Captain Ibrahim Traore didn't need to impress the West. Davido didn't need to please sponsors. Together they pleased no one except the people. And that in itself was revolutionary. This wasn't cultural fluff. It was political fire carried not by armies, but by authenticity, and it set a new standard for what leadership and influence might mean in the heart of Africa. And yet long after the cameras stopped rolling and the news cycle moved on, something remained. A shift, a spark, a sense that what had happened between Davido and Captain Ibrahim Traore wasn't just a one-off gesture, it was the beginning of a movement. $1 million can build roads. It can dig well-stocked schools or fund health clinics. But this gift handed over with no ceremony carried something far more valuable: belief. Belief that change doesn't always start with government grants or international aid. Sometimes it begins with people who care enough to act quietly, boldly, and without being asked. That day the baton was passed, from artist to leader, from fame to responsibility, and Captain Ibrahim Traore caught it with both hands. He didn't use the moment to boast. He used it to set a new tone for African leadership, one grounded in trust, in authenticity, and in the idea that power should serve, not shine. In meetings that followed, he made it clear this money would go directly to the people. No bureaucracy, no middlemen, just impact. And that's when something unexpected happened. Citizens began to come forward, not just in Burkina Faso, but in neighboring countries. Young entrepreneurs offered skills, farmers pledged land, artists pledged time. It was as though Davido's action had cracked open a new path, one that didn't wait for permission or policy, but simply asked, "What can I give?" This wasn't just a financial contribution. It had become a cultural awakening, one that reminded people of something they had long been told to forget, that they had the power to shape their nations, that they didn't need to beg, they could build. And Captain Ibrahim Traore, already known for defying global pressures and reclaiming national pride, stood now as more than a soldier or a president. He had become a conductor, orchestrating not an army, but a collective will. A leader not just in title, but in truth. That's what makes this moment historic. Because history doesn't always happen through revolution. Sometimes it happens through revelation. A quiet gift, a humbled leader, and a continent that looked on not with envy, but with hope. And as that hope spread, something else grew. A sense that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a pan-African call to action, fueled not by foreign investment or global headlines, but by Africans standing for Africans. Davido gave $1 million, but what he truly gave was momentum, and Captain Ibrahim Traore, in his quiet strength, turned that momentum into meaning. Now it's up to us to carry it forward, because this story wasn't just theirs. It was never just between two men. It belongs to everyone who still believes Africa can rise from within. In the end, it was never just about the money. It was about what the money represented. Not a donation, but a declaration. A message that said, we are capable, we are connected, and we are enough. That day in Ouagadougou, something changed, not because of a transaction, but because of a transformation. One artist gave, one leader received. and millions watched as the line between celebrity and citizenship dissolved. But most importantly, they felt something stir inside them. Because when Captain Ibrahim Traore stood there quiet yet firm, accepting the gift without fanfare, he wasn't just accepting money, he was accepting trust. Trust that he wouldn't use it for power but for people. Trust that he would honor not the fame behind the gift, but the faith it carried. And he did. He turned a moment into momentum. He turned applause into action. He reminded everyone, especially the youth of Africa, that leadership doesn't belong to distant figures in faraway capitals. It belongs to those who dare to dream boldly and act selflessly. To those who, like Davido, use what they have not to separate themselves, but to lift others. And as the story traveled across borders, languages, and communities, its impact grew louder. It was no longer about Burkina Faso alone. It became a mirror held up to all of Africa, asking one powerful question. What if we stopped waiting? What if we started building together? The answers came not from politicians but from people. Farmers, students, musicians, mothers, people who saw what Davido did and said, maybe I can give something too. Not just money, but time, skills, ideas, courage. And that is the true legacy of this moment. Because long after headlines fade, and long after the check is spent, what remains is the shift in mindset. The awakening that tells every African you are not helpless, you are not forgotten, and you are certainly not waiting for rescue. That's what Captain Ibrahim Traore has stood for all along. Not perfection, but purpose. Not pride for show, but pride rooted in people. And now, thanks to one unexpected act of solidarity, that purpose has been amplified by a voice from the stage. Two worlds met, and they didn't collide, they collaborated. So where do we go from here? We keep going. We tell these stories. We honor these moments. We amplify those who give without seeking glory. And we follow leaders not for their titles, but for their truths. Because this is more than a feel-good headline. It's a blueprint for something Africa has always held quietly in her hands: unity, dignity, and power from within. And if you've made it this far, maybe that means this story has touched something in you too. So don't just watch. Walk with us. Like, share, subscribe. Because the storm has already begun, and it's ours to carry. If you still believe that a small nation can rise tall, shoulder to shoulder with the giants of this world, if you believe that Africa deserves to tell its own story in its own words with its own voice, if you've ever seen the fire burning in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traore, then this story belongs to you. This isn't just a video, it's a movement, a moment, a message. So like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand beside something bigger than all of us. Together we are not spectators, we are witnesses, we are voices, we are the storm behind the silence. What once began as whispers has now become a quiet revolution. And it's only just begun. There are moments in history that do not announce themselves with grand speeches or global summits. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wrapped in sincerity, grounded in truth, and fueled by courage. The story of Davido and Captain Ibrahim Traore is one of those moments. A musician, a soldier, a meeting in Burkina Faso, and a silent act that shook the conscience of a continent. From this story we learn one of the most profound truths of our time, that power is not always defined by position. It is often defined by purpose. Davido did not walk into that meeting with the authority of a president or the backing of a political machine. He came with his heart, his reputation, and a decision to give. And in that moment he taught us that true influence lies not in how many people listen to your music, but in how you use your voice when it truly matters. His gift of $1 million was not a donation. It was a declaration, a statement that those with means and visibility carry a responsibility not to distance themselves from their people, but to draw closer. To invest not just in brands or tours, but in lives and futures, in forgotten voices. At the same time, we witnessed something equally powerful in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's response. He did not posture, he did not politicize. He received the gift with dignity, not pride. He understood what the moment meant, not just for Burkina Faso, but for every African who has been told they must wait for aid, for approval, for permission to rise. Traoré reminded us that leadership at its core is about stewardship. He did not see Davido's act as a personal honor, but as a shared burden. With that check in hand, he carried the weight of every dream attached to it. Every child who would one day walk to a new school, every farmer who might benefit from clean water, every mother who dares to believe that tomorrow might be kinder than yesterday. And this is where the lesson deepens. We often separate art from governance fame, from responsibility music from policy. But this moment blurred all those lines. It showed us that art can inspire justice, that musicians can be builders, that presidents can be listeners. It taught us that culture is not decoration, it is direction. When used with purpose, it can move mountains and mindsets alike. The story also urges us to reflect on what we value in our public figures. Too often we admire them for their lifestyle, their fashion, their headlines. But this moment redefined what greatness can look like. It looked like a man in plain clothes handing over a life-changing gift, not on a stage, but in a government building. It looked like a leader nodding not in triumph, but in commitment. From this, we are called to rethink how we define contribution. You don't need to be rich to give. You don't need to be famous to lead. What matters is intention, integrity, and impact. The real power lies in the act itself. Whether it's $1 or 1 million, one voice, or one song, when offered with authenticity, it creates ripples far beyond what we can see. Another crucial lesson is the importance of African-to-African solidarity. For too long, the narrative has been one of dependency on the outside world, financially, politically, even psychologically. This story flipped that script. It reminded us that the greatest strength of Africa is Africa itself, that progress doesn't have to be imported. It can be grown, funded, and led from within. This idea that Africans can invest in one another is revolutionary in its simplicity. It challenges deeply rooted assumptions. It reframes the conversation around development. It brings power back to the hands of those who have long been treated as recipients instead of architects. And that is where true freedom begins, not when we are given, but when we give to each other. We also learn about the value of humility. Davido could have held a press conference. He could have used the donation for publicity, but he didn't. His action was quiet, sincere, and without spectacle. That silence spoke louder than any viral clip could. It reminded us that the most powerful moments are not always the loudest, they are the most honest. Captain Ibrahim Traoré matched that energy with something rare in leadership restraint. He did not use the event to score political points. He let the gesture speak for itself. That kind of leadership, grounded in responsibility, not recognition, is exactly what Africa needs more of. Ultimately, this story is not about two men. It is about what they symbolize. Davido represents the potential of cultural capital, how talent and visibility can be used for the common good. Traoré represents the emergence of a new kind of leadership grounded in courage, connection, and service. Together, they offer a glimpse of what the future could look like when integrity meets influence. Perhaps the most important lesson, though, is this change is contagious. One act of generosity became a wave of inspiration. People began asking how they too could give, not just money, but time, knowledge, ideas. And that is how revolutions begin, not always with noise, but with nudges. We live in a time when many are disillusioned by politics, by institutions, by inequality. But this story reminds us that hope is not lost. It is simply waiting for someone to activate it. Someone to say, I will not look away. I will not wait. I will act. Davido acted. Captain Ibrahim Traoré responded, and Africa listened. Now the question is, will we? Because in the end, the true power of this story lies not in what was given, but in what it awakens within us. If we still believe in a continent that lifts itself in leaders who serve and in artists who build, then this moment was not just history, it was a signal, and it was meant for all of us. I've watched many headlines come and go, but this one didn't just make the news, it made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Real, unshakable pride in who we are and in what we're capable of as Africans. The story of Davido's visit to Burkina Faso and his $1 million gift to Captain Ibrahim Traoré has stirred something deep inside me. It's not just about money. It's about the meaning behind it. It's about the gesture, the silence, the respect. The unspoken bond between two sons of this continent, each powerful in his own way, both carrying the hopes of millions. When I first heard the news, I thought it was clickbait. $1 million. Given not to a foreign organization, but straight to an African leader. And not just any leader, but Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a man who's come to symbolize resistance, humility, and true leadership. I had to reread the headline. Then I watched the video, and I found myself not just watching but nodding, smiling, even tearing up. Because for once, the narrative wasn't about failure. It wasn't about poverty, debt, or conflict. It was about unity, about self-respect, about Africans uplifting Africans. Davido didn't have to do it. He could have posted a tweet, shared a message, donated through a foundation, but he chose to come in person, quietly, no red carpet, no media circus, just him, his values, and a message that said, "I believe in this." That alone made me emotional. Because in a world where celebrities often build walls between themselves and the people, Davido did the opposite. He walked forward. He gave not for attention, but for transformation. And then there was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The way he received the gift, without pomp, without pride, said everything about who he is. I've followed him for some time. I've seen the way he speaks, how he dresses, how he listens. He's not chasing status. He's chasing impact. And seeing him accept that check, not as a political tool, but as a commitment to his people, made me respect him even more. What moved me most, though, was the silence between them. No rehearsed speeches, no campaign slogans, just two men, two paths, one purpose. It felt sacred, almost spiritual. And I think that's what people across the continent responded to. That sense of authenticity, that quiet strength, that shared belief that Africa doesn't have to be saved, it has to be trusted. Since the video came out, I've seen conversations shift. My friends are talking about development differently. My community WhatsApp groups are filled with clips, quotes, photos, not of Western leaders, not of foreign donors, but of Davido and Traoré, African men doing what needs to be done. One using his platform, the other using his position, and both doing it with grace. This story made me think deeply about our role as citizens, about how we often underestimate the power we have to influence change. I'm not a millionaire, I'm not a president, but watching them reminded me that every act matters, that we don't have to be rich to be relevant, that we don't need permission to uplift one another. Sometimes we just need courage. What Davido did was an invitation, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré's response was a challenge. Together they've sparked something, a wave of thought, a call to action. And that's the part that excites me most. Because this wasn't a one-time event, it was a seed. And we're already seeing it grow. Young people in my town are talking about launching community projects. Local artists are speaking about using their work for social causes. Even older generations are paying attention, saying, maybe this is the kind of Africa we've been waiting for. And they're right, because this is the Africa we've always known was possible. An Africa that doesn't need pity. An Africa that doesn't wait to be rescued. An Africa where our leaders listen, where our celebrities give back, where our people rise, not because they were told to, but because they choose to. I also want to mention how refreshing it is to see a story like this, that doesn't involve scandal, controversy, or conflict. It's just goodness. Simple, honest, powerful goodness. And we don't get enough of that in the media. Too often African stories are filtered through a lens of struggle. But this was different. This was strong. This was hopeful. To me, this story is not just inspiring. It's instructional. It shows what can happen when ego is put aside, when collaboration takes the lead, when power meets purpose. It reminds us that giving isn't weakness, it's strength. That humility isn't silence, it's wisdom. That leadership isn't control, it's service. And if you ask me what I took away most from this moment, I'd say this: the revolution we want won't come with noise. It will come with choices, one quiet act at a time. Davido made his. Captain Ibrahim Traoré made his. Now the rest of us must decide what we'll do with what we've seen. Because this isn't just a headline, it's a turning point. And I, for one, choose to believe. Believe that we can give more, speak more, build more, trust more. Believe that Africa's best chapters are not behind us, they are ahead. Believe that the fire we see in Traoré's eyes is the same fire that lives in all of us. And most of all, believe that we don't need to wait for the world to write our story. We've already picked up the pen. The more I reflect on this story, the more I realize it's not just a feel-good moment, it's a mirror. A mirror held up to us asking, what kind of Africa do we want to live in? What kind of legacy do we want to leave? Because let's be honest, stories like this aren't common. That's why they cut so deeply. They show us what's possible, and in doing so, they expose how far we've drifted from it. There was something almost poetic in the way Captain Ibrahim Traoré responded to Davido's gesture. He didn't treat it as a gift to himself, he treated it as a responsibility. And that is the mark of a leader who understands that real honor comes not from applause, but from action. I've seen too many leaders in Africa who would have turned that donation into a media circus, a personal brand campaign, or worse, a gateway for corruption. But Traoré didn't. He absorbed the moment with calm resolve. That's what made it powerful. I think people across the continent saw themselves in this story. Not because we all have $1 million to give. Not because we all have political power, but because we know what it means to want to do more for our neighbors, our families, our communities. We've all felt that desire. What we often lack is a system that makes it feel possible. This story made it feel possible again. And Davido, he did what many talk about, but few actually do. He used his fame not for vanity, but for vision. He reminded me that celebrity doesn't have to mean separation. It can mean service. His act didn't just close the distance between Nigeria and Burkina Faso. It closed the distance between status and struggle, between artist and citizen, between wealth and purpose. What's even more remarkable is how this moment wasn't driven by any international body, global initiative, or foreign press. It was purely African. Conceived, delivered, and received within the continent. That's a lesson in sovereignty, in capability, in self-respect. If our media focused more on these stories, I believe we'd see a cultural shift. Young Africans would be inspired not just to be famous, but to be useful. Leaders would feel pressure not just to speak, but to serve. And maybe we'd start building the Africa we've always deserved. To be honest, this story gave me hope in a time I didn't realize I'd lost it. It reminded me that good still exists, that decency matters, that change is not only possible, it's already happening, quietly, steadily, in rooms with no microphones and moments with no headlines. We just have to pay attention. We have to amplify it. And most importantly, we have to carry it forward. Because if Davido can give, and if Captain Ibrahim Traoré can lead, then what's stopping the rest of us from doing our part? Conceived, delivered, and received within the continent, that's a lesson in sovereignty, in capability, in self-respect. If our media focused more on these stories, I believe we'd see a cultural shift. Young Africans would be inspired not just to be famous, but to be useful. leaders would feel pressure not just to speak, but to serve. And maybe we'd start building the Africa we've always deserved. To be honest, this story gave me hope in a time I didn't realize I'd lost it. It reminded me that good still exists, that decency matters, that change is not only possible, it's already happening. Quietly, steadily, in rooms with no microphones and moments with no headlines. We just have to pay attention. We have to amplify it. And most importantly, we have to carry it forward. Because if Davido can give, and if Captain Ibrahim Traoré can lead, then what's stopping the rest of us from doing our part?